This is Colorado Matters from CPR News. I'm Andrea Dukakis in for Ryan Warner. The federal government shutdown has ended for now, but negotiations around border security and the idea of a border wall continue. We wanted to get some personal perspective from someone who's been there and worked with people who've crossed the border. Sister Evangeline Salazar is a nun at the Bennett Hill Monastery in Colorado Springs. She worked as a translator near the El Paso Juarez border. It was at a shelter that houses migrants seeking asylum in the U.S. These are people who've recently been released from detention centers. And Evangeline, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You volunteered twice at this particular shelter called Annunciation House. That was once in November and again for much of December through early January. The shelter collaborates with ICE to help these migrants, and it provides things like housing, food, and clothing until refugees can connect with sponsors. Why did you choose to go?
Well, I chose to go because I believe in the call from Jesus Christ. It says we need to work with the poor, the hungry, and the oppressed. And we had a call from the leadership of women religious because they needed some volunteers. And so they called and asked if some nuns could come and help out. And so when I got the invitation, I said, sure, I'll come. And so I worked it out with my prioress, and I arrived in El Paso.
Describe what a typical day was like for you when you were there.
Well, earlier you said we work in collaboration with ICE. We don't really work with ICE. We're independent of ICE. The thing is that they tell us when the detainees are going to be released out into the street.
So that's the connection you have with ICE.
That's the connection. And so once they tell us that they're coming out, we send buses or cars or vans to pick up the refugees. And we bring them to our center. We're one of 10 centers that are run by Annunciation House. I've worked at 2 centers. The one I worked the most in was called Nazareth. Mm-hmm. So once the refugees arrive and get out of the buses, we take them in, we welcome them, we welcome them like guests. And then we take down their name and address and who their sponsors are, and we assign them beds actually, because sometimes we have 2 families to a room.
Right.
Then we, after that process, then we allow them to pick out a new outfit of clothing because they come with only what they have on their backs, and who knows how long they've been with those clothes because they've been months maybe in the detention center and walking to the border.
What's the general state of mind of these migrants when they come to you?
They're all weary, tired, and they have a lot of faith and a lot of hope. So sometimes they're sick from colds and stomach aches and that sort of thing. And the ones that I worked with, the ones that arrived at our place, are mostly a parent with a child, a mother with a mother with a daughter or a son, a father with not a whole family unit, just father, mother with children.
Are there stories about the migrants that really stand out for you?
You know what? Everybody has a story, and every story is very sad. They've all come from suffering, great suffering. They've been violated. They've been oppressed. They're running away from violence. Their homes have been threatened. Their jobs were threatened. And so they've got the American dream. They're full of hope. They think that once they get to the United States, they're going to be able to have some freedom and live a life.
You talked about a man who wore plastic bags on his feet for shoes. Talk about that.
Well, this happened one day. When they come in, we provide clothing for them. Sometimes we don't have anything to give them. We depend a lot on donations. We depend always on donations, and sometimes we get a lot of used shoes. Sometimes we get new shoes, but we didn't have any at this point. And so I noticed this man had plastic bags over his feet. And we do tell them when they first come in that they have to wear their shoes because we don't want them walking around barefooted. Well, anyway, he had plastic bags for his shoes. And I asked him why he was shoeless, actually. And he said, well, my son wore out his shoes, so I gave him my shoes. And I felt so badly, I was ready to take my shoes off and give them to him because it looked like maybe we wore the same size. But, it was really hard because I only had 2 pairs of shoes with me in El Paso, and I didn't know whether I really wanted to give. It was a struggle between myself and my conscience and what do I do. But anyway, I went to the house where I live, which is next door to the center, and I picked up my sandals because I thought I'd give him my shoes and I could use my sandals. But just before I took my shoes off, I thought, I want to check that shoe room again. And sure enough, I found a pair of shoes that fit the boy. And so the father was able to get his shoes from the son. And that took care of that. So there was an angel there somewhere.
You kept a 14-day journal with some of these stories. It was one for each day of the Stations of the Cross. And you put the entries in a letter that you sent to your community. And you write about a boy you met. And I'd like you to read a bit from day 6.
Yesterday, I sat with the father of a 3-year-old child. I felt a small hand rubbing the side of my face. I looked up, smiled at the boy, and smiling back at me, he said, "Crusty," in Spanish. I could not take my eyes off of him. I was so taken up by this small gesture of love. Imagine a 3-year-old noticing a crust on the side of your face, reaching out his small hand to wipe it away. I was moved to tears. As I held the child in my arms, my thoughts turned to Veronica, wiping the face of Jesus on the way to Calvary. What did that small gesture mean to the Son of God? Walking slowly on a dirty, dusty road, his face sweaty, dirty, and itching, and along comes a young woman, risking her life to wipe the face of Jesus. Today was one of those days. The people arrived, dirty, smelly, hungry, and needing to go to the bathroom. We waited for them and gave them what little we had. A clean washcloth to wipe their faces and hands. It's amazing how a clean, cool washcloth can lift the dirt from their faces, can lift the spirit of the tired and the weary.
What have you taken away from these visits to the border?
I've taken away, my faith has increased. I look at these people with absolutely nothing but their faith and their hope in a God and a country and a people that will give them the opportunity that they need to lift themselves to a better life. My heart just goes out to them. I cry a lot because of the sadness and the suffering that they've come through and their stories. But my faith has increased. I believe that this is the call from God for all of us in this country, to be hospitable and welcoming.
Aren't they taking really serious risks by coming here knowing they might be separated from their children during processing?
Yes, they take all kinds of risks, actually. That's the hardest one. And really, we had never heard about separation from their children and their separating the children from the parents until we had that crisis. And we all protested, of course. We all can remember that. But they have enough faith that that won't happen. That won't happen again. And so they take whatever risks they have to take. It's a risk just walking from one country across Mexico to try to reach the United States, and then the risk of just waiting in Juarez before they're allowed to come into the United States for the process.
What do you want folks who haven't had any experience at the border to understand what it's like there?
You know what? I said to my community when I came back, I wish that all of you could be there just to see, just to touch the skin of the poor. We talk a lot in this country about the poor, helping the poor, doing this for the poor. But how many of us really touch the lives of the poor? How many of us can look into their eyes and not say, I'm so sorry for you, but just to look into their eyes and see the Christ child there?
Evangeline, thanks so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Sister Evangeline Salazar has been a nun for 60 years. She's based at the Bennett Hill Monastery in Colorado Springs. She volunteered at the El Paso Juarez border with Annunciation House. It's a shelter that houses migrants seeking asylum in the U.S. once they've been released from detention centers. This is Colorado Matters from CPR News.